Okay, so with the new school season here, I figured this would be a good time to create a new Access Database tutorial series and have it be geared towards new students. So we're going to look at the major objects that create a database and how those objects can interact. So let's begin. The first object that we're going to look at are tables. Tables are what really make a database a database. It is the central repository of information. So the data that you're trying to store is stored in a table. What does a table look and act like? It looks and acts a lot like an Excel spreadsheet. So if you think about an Excel spreadsheet, it has columns with headers. Rows are the individual records for each column. The values in those cells can be formatted with different types, such as date or currency. So, although there are some distinct differences, if you want an idea of what a table is like, that's basically what a table is like. It's basically an Excel spreadsheet, but with several notable exceptions, which we'll get to in a minute. Okay, so when you start Access, it will give you a menu of what type of database do you want to choose. Just choose blank database, and this is what you'll see. So on the left side is where all the objects are that comprise this particular database. As you can see, by default, it creates one. We're going to delete it and create it by hand just so you can see the process. And up here is the ribbon. Basically, in 2007, I believe it was, Microsoft wanted to create a unified appearance to their various Office applications, and so they came up with the ribbon. And so you'll see commands and instruction about modifying the ribbon or hiding the ribbon. That's what it's talking about, all these menus at the top. Okay, so what we're going to do is in the upper right corner, just click on this little X here, and it deletes that table. It was never saved. Basically what it did is when you open a new database, it also runs the create table command for you. We're just going to do that manually so you can see that. So you're going to spend a lot of time with the Home tab and the Create tab. Let's click on the Create tab and then choose Table. See, this is exactly what we had a minute ago, but I just wanted you to see that two-step process. Now, it doesn't look like much because there's only one column and no values, but this is what's known as datasheet mode. And datasheet mode is what you would think of when you think of an Excel spreadsheet. Again, it has columns, it has rows. However, if you're going to modify a table, you're going to not want to treat it like an Excel spreadsheet. It does, because as you can see, it says click to add. You really don't want to do that. You're going to want to go into design mode, and that's where you'll add the tables. So up here you can see View. Click on the drop-down arrow, and you can see Datasheet. So it's in Datasheet view. As like I said, very similar to the way an Excel spreadsheet would look. Here's Design View. Go ahead and click on that. It's going to ask you to name this. Let's call this Books _ Games. We're going to make an inventory of objects that you like to collect, your hobby objects. So in this case, we're going to look at books and games. And we'll click on OK. Now this is Design View. You're going to notice this says Primary Key and there's a little key here. We'll talk about this later, so just click on that to undo it. So this is how you add new columns. So this isn't really any data entry at the moment. This is just saying what fields you want to be able to fill in. So this is where you're designing the table itself and not entering information into the table. So for field name, we'll call this I don't want to use the word object because that's protected, which we'll get into in a moment, or it's potentially protected. Let's call this collectible. So it's whatever it is that you're collecting. For data type, now in Excel, you can click on a single cell or highlight a column and choose what type of data it's going to be. In this, you don't have the option of doing a single cell. You have to do the entire column. And it defaults to auto number. What's auto number? Exactly what it says. It will automatically create a number. So let's click on the drop-down arrow. So there's short text and long text. The difference is short text is a maximum of 255 characters. Long text is much, much longer. Why would you choose short? Because it saves memory. And we can talk about that later when we talk about database optimization. Number is just that, a number. It's good to note that just because what you're storing is a number doesn't mean you necessarily want to store it in number format, because lots of numbers are not calculated. Phone numbers, social security numbers. You might not want to calculate an age. You might not. You might just want to store that as a value. So there are definitely times where you are storing numbers, but you don't want them to be calculated or manipulated. So in that case, you'd probably actually store them as text. Also, that way you don't have to worry about leading zeros being dropped off when you export it and things like that. Number, large number, date, time, currency. These are pretty self-explanatory, but we'll do some specific examples. Auto number, that's the one it defaulted to. Yes, no. As it would suggest, you can only put two answers, either yes or no. Object, linking, and embedding, not going to worry about that for now. Hyperlink, pretty self-explanatory. It's a link to a remote location as opposed to something being stored. So you're storing the link, but not the actual object. So in that case, the data is a path. Attachment, calculated, and Lookup Wizard. So for this, we're just going to do short text. So you have a collectible that you want or have, and it's a short text. Now the next one will be possessed. Not the spiritual possession, just a do you own it? So possessed. And for this, you could do yes, no. So let's do that so you can see an example of the yes, no field. And let's see. Maybe you are potentially buying and selling these. So we could do cost. And for that would be currency. And then we could do sell. That would also be currency. And we could also do... Now let's keep it for now. That's good enough. I was thinking about adding a flag that says, okay, this won't be sold, this will be kept, but we can always modify the table later. So what you're going to do is you're going to click on the little X here, and it's going to prompt you. Actually, it's going to prompt you to save again because you've made changes. So if you click on the little X, do you want to save the changes? Yes. So in this case, it's not asking you to change the name. It's just saying, do you want to save the changes you made? You choose yes. So remember, you just modified the table itself, but you didn't really do any data entry. So to perform data entry, as opposed to changing the table itself, you just double-click on that. That will get you into Data Sheet View. And now it's looking a little bit more like a spreadsheet. You still don't have any rows, but you do have columns now. So if you point at the separator, you can make these wider. So just point, clicked, and then dragged. And you're going to see data entry is very inefficient. This is going to be addressed in a later video. But much like a spreadsheet, you can just type right in the fields when you're in Data Sheet View. So maybe it's a game. Yes, you own it. As you can see, it's just a combination of clicking with the mouse, navigating with tab. Tab moves you one over. So maybe you paid full price when this came out, and it's worth not nearly as much now. And maybe there's something else. That one you don't own. You don't know the cost, you don't know the sell, but you don't possess it. And oops, I put in too many A's, so we'll just take out one. And again, that was just click and hit the backspace, so typical data entry. And let's do another one. That one you do own. That one you didn't pay much for, but has really appreciated in price since. Another one that you do possess, and another one that you bought, and this one is also appreciated. And let's do one more. And the actual names don't matter. I'm just randomly making up stuff. And this one will also be not possessed. This one will say that right now, if you don't own something but you see a price for it, that means the cost in the cell would technically be the same. I don't want to get too much into semantics, but basically, if you're willing to buy that much, then that means at the moment the cost in the cell is the same. So you could either put in a cost and put in the cell as the same, or you could leave the cell blank. Again, this isn't an organizational type of database. This is really just what you're tracking for your own knowledge. So as long as you're consistent with your logic, that's what matters. Okay, so now we have a table. Now we've done some data entry. Now, because I widen the column, it is going to prompt me to save again. Having said that, if I had entered data but didn't change any of the actual format, I would not be prompted to make a change. I would not be prompted to save. And the reason why is the moment you've entered information into a field, as soon as you move into another field, that's it. You've made that change. If there was a value there, it was wiped out. If there wasn't a value there, there is one now. The only exception, if I'm in a field and I make a change, but I don't move, if I hit escape, you can undo that change, but it's a one-off. If I keep hitting escape, nothing's happening. So it's an important point to know that as soon as you enter that data, as soon as you've moved to the next column, you've saved it. You don't need to hit the save button because that's not what you're doing. When you're hitting save, you're saving a structural change, not a data entry change. The data entry is saved right away. So what we've shown in this video is how to make a table, how to make different data formats, and now the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to show you how to modify a table once you've made changes other than the width. So if you click on the little X, again, you get a prompt. You say yes. And now what we're going to do is we're going to open it up again. Click on View and click on Design View. And what we're going to do here is we're going to put in a qualifier. Is this a book or a game? So you could call it book or game, or you could put in collectible type, that kind of thing. So book. Let's avoid the word. Well, we could use the word or, but let's do it this way. Or is used in programming, so you have to be careful about that. Also, as you notice, I didn't use spaces, I used underscores. That's considered a best practice. Can you make a field name that has a space in it? Absolutely. But when you do some of the more advanced features, it could cause problems. So some of the best practices are considered to not use spaces, use an underscore instead. Also, you want to avoid words that are protected words, such as name, date, type, length. These are all words that are functionally used in Access. So you really don't want to use those as standalone words. So instead of using date, you could use received date. You could use birth date. You could use whatever type of date. You don't want to ever just use the word date. You want to use some kind of qualifier because the word by itself is protected. Again, words like name, date, length, things like that. Also, it's considered a best practice because as databases get bigger and organizations get bigger, there are potentially lots of different people who are going to see the data from your database. So in the context of a table, because the table will usually have a descriptive name, then the field name will make lots of sense, such as the word name. You export that and you give it to someone, and they give it to someone, and they give it to someone, and suddenly name doesn't have any context to it anymore. It's now just on a spreadsheet that's been given out 3 times. Well, what name? Employee name? Product name? Street name? That would probably be in an address field, but you get what I mean, that name out of context could mean a lot of things. So you want to avoid words that are too simple because they have no meaning really, or they're too ambiguous when they are removed out of the context of the table that they're in. And you also want to avoid words that are protected words. All right, so book or game. What you can do with this one is you could do Lookup Wizard just so you can see how this works. For the Lookup Wizard, you have 2 choices. You could create a second table, and the table would feed into this. So you would create a linkage from one table to another. You'd probably do that for something like maybe a human resource table. So for instance, you don't want to have 2 separate places to enter Jane Doe's name when she starts working for the company. She would be entered into the human resource table, and then any other table that needs to use that name Jane Doe would use the Lookup Wizard and link out to that other table rather than trying to manually enter her as a selection. Now in this case, we only have 2 choices, so we're going to use the second choice. I want to type in the values that I want. We'll click on Next. Make sure you widen this column, because what happens is if you have a name that exceeds this width, it will get truncated. The end will get cut off. So you kind of want to make this a little bit wider than necessarily what you want, because you don't want it to be truncated. It's always better to have extra space than too little. You don't want people guessing what the rest of the sentence says. So we'll say book, and then we'll just click down here, and we'll choose game. And then next. And this says what's the label. You can always change that later, but that tells you what the label for it is. Do you want to limit entries to the choices? Yes, limit to the list. In other words, you don't want people to be able to add to the list. Kind of defeats the purpose of a list. Do you want to store multiple values in for this lookup? No, you can just leave it like that. So finish. Now watch what happens. We made a change to the structure, so it's going to prompt us to save. Say yes. Open it again. And you don't have to keep closing it like I'm doing that. I'm just doing that so you get the hang of navigation. If you've never seen Access before, it's a lot to look at, so I want you to get comfortable using the navigation pane here. Okay, so watch what happens. Now, as you can see, the column is cut off, but we can always widen that. I'm not going to, because I want to demonstrate what I was saying about if you don't make a structural change, it doesn't prompt you to save. So for this, if you click on this, see, there's a drop-down arrow now. So rather than manually typing in, you click on the drop-down arrow, and now you have the choice of book or game. And we'll say that one was a game. We'll say this one was a game. We'll say this one was a book. We'll say this one was a book. And we'll say this one was a book. Now watch what happens. It did not prompt me. So that's a very important point. You are not saving the data in the table. That gets saved the moment you navigate away from a cell. What you're saving is any structural change. So if there is no structural change, it doesn't prompt you. So if I go back in there again, see, the data is there. So very, very important to remember that as soon as you make a change to data, as soon as you move from that cell, it's been saved. And that's going to come into play a lot more later when you're trying to decide, am I saving a change to an object such as a form, or am I saving the data that's being stored in the form? So I think that's about enough for the first video. We've looked at several different types of data format. That we have the yes no column, we have currency, we went back and we added a new column. We showed how to do a lookup, at least a lookup using a manually entered list. We can certainly create an example where there's a lookup into a separate table, but you'd really only do that again if you have a non-static list. Like for instance, this is tracking just books and games. Person has 2 interests, nothing wrong with that, but it's not a huge list and it doesn't look like it's changing. So it's okay to do a manually entered list in that case. You'd go out to a table if it's something that's constantly changing and really, really big. So you don't want that stored in multiple locations. So again, an example of a human resource table would be one example of why you would do that. Okay, so I think that's it for this first video. We'll probably do another one focusing on tables, and then we'll look at queries, which is a way of doing a search to say, I want to see which ones I possess. And so you can run a query that gives you just the possessed ones. And then we'll look at forms, and forms will give you a user-friendly interface, so you're not doing all this clicking and tabbing, that you would have a simple form that allows for a more structured database entry. Not to mention that you're seeing everything. Maybe you don't want them to see anything at all. Maybe you don't want the person who's doing the data entry to see the data. You only want them to be able to enter their current data. Whatever it is that they're entering, that's all they need to see is what they're entering. But here, whoever is doing the data entry in this can see everything. So that is definitely a huge issue when it comes to confidentiality and security, that using datasheet, as you can see, you open it up and you see everything. There's no control on it. So lots of things to consider, and I hope I didn't throw too much at the end there, but I hope this has been helpful. If you have any questions, just let me know, and I'm willing to add, if time permits, different videos based on what you guys would like to see. So the next video will probably be a follow-up to this. Maybe we'll look at linking out to a table, and then after that, like I said, we'll look at queries and we'll look at forms, and then the very last thing will be reports. But I won't get into that now, but you'll see why we won't do too much with reports. Okay, so good luck. Anyone who's taking database classes, I hope this has been helpful.